You're listening to Business Talk Radio, where we take business to the next level.
Today's show is sponsored by Dr. Jacalyn. Take charge of your life personally, financially, and professionally. Visit drjacalyn.com to book an appointment today.
Hello and welcome to Rapping with Dr. Jacalyn, live here on Business Talk Radio, Facebook Live, and YouTube Live. I am your executive producer and your host, Dr. Jacalyn Kerbeck. Our show is about hope, inspiration, and stories of overcoming adversity. Today, I have a special co-host who is backstage, and she's going to join us. Her name is Diann Floyd Boehm, and Diann is an international children's book author. She is also a speaker, and she is the founder of the Story Garden, and she's also my friend. So welcome to the show, Diann.
Thank you. So happy to be here.
So I know you just did a little bit of a road trip from Texas to Maryland, so I hope you're getting settled in there.
Sure am. Thanks.
Well, we've got a terrific guest. I'm going to bring him out from backstage. It's Reverend Mike Harder. He is the president of Concentric, and he is also a friend of mine. Welcome to the program, Mike.
Thanks for having me. It's good to be with you.
So you are the president of Concentric, and for those who are not familiar with your organization, what exactly is it that you do there?
So Concentric is a mission organization, and the easiest way to explain it is we do equipping for ministry leaders around the world. We teach them how to follow Jesus' leadership principles in their ministry and Jesus' strategy for making disciples and make disciples. So how did Jesus develop leaders? How did Jesus develop a succession plan and pass the ministry on to other leaders? That's what we do.
That's a phenomenal work that you're doing there. And I know from speaking with you before that you have traveled the globe spreading the word of the Lord. And that's a big part of your job. Is that correct?
It is. I travel. Most of my work when I'm traveling is doing equipping with indigenous leaders in various countries. So I'm going in to equip them, to train them in our model of following Christ's model of ministry, and then to coach them in how to implement that into their ministry. So it's one thing to go to a seminar. It's another thing to have somebody come along and help you implement what you learn at the seminar. That's the coaching. And then mentoring is helping them then reproduce and do the same thing, do the training, coaching, and mentoring. So helping them understand, how do they coach others? How do they train others? So when I travel, for the most part, the purpose of my travel is to train, coach, mentor, to equip leaders. But I do I speak in other churches, I speak at conferences and such when I'm in those different places. So yes.
And I know Diann has a question for you, but I'm wondering also, during this time of COVID, when people's lives have been completely disrupted in a lot of ways, are you finding any change in terms of more people wanting to join the ministry, more people wanting to become ministers, priests, missionaries?
It's a good question. I would say that, I wouldn't necessarily say that I'm seeing more people wanting to join the ministry during COVID, but I have seen a lot more engagement from lay people wanting to step in, pull up their sleeves, so to speak, and help their neighbors and get engaged in different ministries. And I've seen a lot of innovation too in ministries here in the States as well as globally in other continents.
And it's interesting to me, and you and I have discussed this before, that during COVID, there's a number of people who are very angry. And, why is this going on? Why did this happen to my loved one? Why is my business going south? And And what is the stance of, as a reverend, what do you say to people when they come to you and say, my life is falling apart? Is God there? Why isn't he helping me?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's one of the age-old questions that we have as human beings, isn't it? Why do bad things happen to good people, and why is there so much evil in the world and such? So what do I say to them? I mean, usually at first I try to empathize because I care. We all care, and when we see other people suffering, we should have a sense of compassion and empathy. Part of that is just listening to them, and then trying to encourage them and pray for them, helping them then see some of the things that hopefully are going well. For most people, they're not losing everything in life. They're not losing their health, their house, their family, everything at once. So helping us regain perspective during that, I think, is important too. Because when things are going, there have been times where I've been, honestly, just to be transparent, I'm human too. And so there have been times when I get caught in traffic and I think I'm going to be, 5 minutes late for a meeting. And then it's like, why, God, why is this happening now? And it's like, in one sense, then I start thinking, oh, give me a break. Let's not be so, so silly here. So, I mean, perspective, and people are going through very difficult things. I mean, I know people that have been very sick with the virus. I know people that lost their jobs. In other parts of the globe, I know people that have lost loved ones because of COVID. So listening, empathy, but perspective too, and helping to see the hope in it all as well. The other thing is just realizing, as a minister, I would say that I would then point to not to trivialize, but to help us have a transcendent and a bigger picture of reality than just the temporal. So we are eternal beings, and the time that we spend on earth is finite. You might have 70 years, 80 years, 100 years, maybe 55 years. You don't know. And so to put our time on earth in the perspective of eternity, and so me coming as a Christian minister, coming from a Christian perspective, I would say that I want to help people remember or center into our hope in Christ, our hope in the resurrection of Christ and life after this time on earth. We live in a broken world, a world with something that is not a term that we use as much today, but the word sin, or selfishness, enters in, and it breaks relationships. People take advantage of people, and people hurt people, and then just the circumstances of life can do that. And so I try to point to the eternal perspective as well. So that's a couple of things that I typically do. There's some others, but those are the first ones I would say initially.
And you've shared with me, and it's really resonated, was why are we giving thanks for all the good? Why are we just looking at the bad? Because there definitely is good in this world.
Sure, that's a perspective thing. So when I thought about it a while back, and I've heard other people talk about this too. But a lot of the time we'll ask the question of why is there so much evil in the world, and that's the problem of evil. But if we say that evil is a problem, then we also have to say that good's a problem. Otherwise, things need to be neutral, right? So I asked the question of why is there so much good in the world? And what do we do with the problem of good, just like the problem of evil? So, why, my wife and I were down in New Jersey at the beach last week, and I, saw the sunrise and walked into the surf of the waves and just the beauty of God's creation. And then actually the beauty of God's creation and my wife too, spending time with my wife and just being thankful and grateful that I have a friend in her and other friends. So just, seeing the good that God's created in people, and not just the evil he's created in people, and the good that he's created in creation, and not just the bad things that happen with the brokenness of it all. So.
And I think when you do see the good in people and you do believe in God and you do pray and you give thanks, that you're drawn to other people who feel the same way. I know Diann's a very positive person, and she's also a religious and spiritual person, and obviously you are as well, Mike. Diann, what are your thoughts about that?
Well, every single day I give thanks that I found our Lord Jesus Christ, and I'm so excited to meet you, Mike, because what you're doing is just phenomenal. I have a question for you. How could you share with the audience if they think they're being called to be a leader and disciple? How would they go about it to know that's really true and be a part of what you're offering?
Sure. So, from a general sense of feeling a calling, I would say that the Gospels and in getting right to the message of Jesus, that we're all called to follow. We're called to follow him and be a disciple. And so each person that says that they, if you say, I want to be a Christian, the word Christian is only used 3 times in the New Testament. The word disciple is used, depending on the how it gets translated, about 240 times, 235 to 240 times in the New Testament. The words really are synonymous: disciple, Christian. So a disciple is somebody that, or a Christian is somebody that's a disciple. A disciple is somebody that follows after a teacher. So the first thing I would say in calling is, okay, that you know Christ, but now you follow him. How do you follow him? By living out his character and his priorities. His priorities were loving God and loving others. So it begins with that. So if you should feel a calling at some level to ministry as a Christian, because I think we're all called to ministry as Christians. So there's the priorities there, and the priority of relationship with God, relationship with others, and the character. I would say, if you look at Galatians 5, you have a great passage written by the Apostle Paul where he talks about the fruits of the Spirit. That's the character of Christ that we're supposed to take on, and it's not just doing. The Christian walk is an interesting thing because it's surrendering to God and allowing God to do the work in us, but it's also our doing the things that will make that more possible. It's like it's like the difference between my saying that I want to be I want to run a marathon. Okay, if I want to run a marathon, I'm going to have to train to run a marathon. I can go run a marathon and do it at my own strength, but it's not going to work out well. You'll both be visiting me in the hospital probably. If I train for a marathon, if I start to train for it. And there's that idea in the scripture over and over again that Paul talks about, and we see it other places, of training in righteousness. So I would say, that's a lot. That's like a mini sermon. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
But feeling called into, let's say somebody feels vocationally called into ministry.
Okay, yeah.
Then I would encourage them to find somebody, a pastor or somebody that is in ministry that can serve as a mentor to them, that can help them, and they can start talking through it. When I was a teenager, my pastor did that. There was also a seminary student, Joe, that took me under his wing, and he had, in one sense you could say, I was one of his disciples, okay, because he discipled me in following Jesus. So find a mentor and just start investigating in that way, and maybe shadow a person a little bit. When I was a local church youth pastor out in Lancaster for about 9 years, I had interns with me, and they were people that shadowed me in ministry. One of those interns today is a pastor down in South Jersey, a senior pastor of a church down in Summers Point. Another one's a pastor in Florida, down in West Palm Beach. Another one's a pastor right outside Philadelphia. One's out in Chambersburg, and they're different places. But all those young guys, they're older guys now. They've got, some of them have kids in college. That makes me feel really old. But they spent time with me and watched me in the good, the bad, and the ugly. Watched me in my strengths, my weaknesses, and learned from me and interned with me. And then all those guys, and I could mention some young ladies too. I'm thought of 3 guys right away, but there's some young ladies as well. They all went on to get some training, some schooling at various Bible schools and Christian colleges and such, and seminaries later on. So, yeah. Hopefully
it's very interesting.
Sure.
Thanks for sharing that. We've got more questions. When we come back, I want to hear more about Concentric, and I also want to talk about the topic of sin. But right now, we're going to take a break and hear from our friends who are our sponsors. So stay with us. We'll be right back with Rapping with Dr. Jacalyn.
Hey everybody, my name is Ralph Graves Jr. I'm the host of the Ralph Graves Jr. Show, and I want to invite you to pick up my book, Unstoppable. I wrote a book called Unstoppable. It's 7 universal laws that will transform how you pursue and achieve success. The one thing that my 20 years of law enforcement has taught me is that no matter who you are, we are all governed by universal laws, like gravity. But in this book, we're going to talk about laws like the law of forgiveness, laws like the law of control, the law of intelligent practice, the law of expectancy. I was able to see how those, no matter what their background was, those who identified and treated these laws with respect, they were able to go on and lead successful lives. So pick up this book, and you can go ahead and pick it up at Amazon.com, BarnesandNoble.com, RalphGravesJr.com, where anywhere where fine books are sold. Thank you.
There are 7.7 billion people on Earth today. 40% of these people are under the age of 25. Young adults are the most fertile mission field in the world today. In Scripture, we see Jesus pouring his life into 12 young adults who he equipped to change the world and all of history. Like Jesus, we believe that the best approach to reach the world with the gospel is to invest in young, emerging leaders and equip them to build disciple-making movements. Concentric is the notion of surrounding and sharing a common center. Our center is the model and strategy of Jesus for both leadership development and ministry formation. As a global alliance, we provide equipping in biblical leadership based on Jesus' example in the New Testament. Jesus modeled for us how to make disciples that reproduce. Focusing on leadership development is key to creating movements that spread the gospel and Jesus' disciple-making strategy to young leaders around the globe. Our ministry alliance partners are actively equipping leaders and building movements of multiplication that reproduce the life of Christ. Join us today to equip young leaders with Jesus' strategy that will change cities and nations.
The session that we had with BCAT was really entertaining and enlightening. We were able to put together some very specific steps that we as individuals can take, and it was really fun to all come together and see sort of where we're going as a team and how we can all get there together.
We had a tremendous experience with the BCAT partners. One of the challenges that we have as an organization is to make sure that we have the right people in the right chairs doing the right thing. To do that well, you have to have synergy. You can try to dream up ways to make sure that your group does that, or you can rely on experts. We would recommend BCAT partners to anybody who's looking to take their organization to the next level.
Academy Sedan and Limo is a full-service transportation company serving the Philadelphia metropolitan area with full knowledge of the New York City, Baltimore, and Washington, D.C. areas. We pride ourselves on being the most dependable, conscientious company in the industry. Our always on-time service and dependable pricing make us the company to call for any event or occasion. Our vehicles can accommodate any size party for any occasion. Our vehicles range from four-door sedans to SUVs to minivans to limo buses to full-size tour buses and can accommodate groups of 2 to 100. We offer airport shuttle service or over-the-road service without limitation regarding mileage or time, and no drive is too long or too far. So if you find yourself in need of transportation of any type with any vehicle, give us a call at 610-842-4564 and let us show you what a real transportation company can do for you.
Use code ACADEMY2020 to receive 20% off your first 3 rides, including parking and tolls.
Make a bold statement by wearing a custom jewelry design from Margie Cedrone, Artisan Jeweler, located at 121 Haddon Avenue in Westmont, New Jersey. Telephone number 215-384-7155. Margie Cedrone is an artisan jeweler who has been a permanent fixture on the renowned Jewelers Row in Center City, Philadelphia since 1988. Starting her business in 1982, all of Margie's designs are individually handmade as well as custom design. She is one of the only jewelers left in the area who still crafts the finest tailor-made diamond jewelry, whether it's a statement piece or an everyday item. In addition to her one-of-a-kind designs, she specializes in pearl stringing and bead jewelry repairs. Margie Cedrone Jewelry pairs nearly 30 years of experience with the building of lifelong client relationships. Dr. Jacalyn has been a client and friend of Margie Cedrone for many, many years. Each week during my show, Rapping with Dr. Jacalyn, live on Business Talk Radio, I will be featuring one of the beautiful pieces of jewelry that Margie custom made for me. I urge you to contact Margie through her website, margiecedronejewelry.com. Wait no longer to make your own bold statement.
Today's show is sponsored by Dr. Jacalyn. Take charge of your life personally, financially, and professionally. Visit drjacalyn.com to book an appointment today.
Ladies and gentlemen, here it is, the most listened to radio show on the planet. Even the other stations are tuned in too.
You're listening to Business Talk Radio, where we take business to the next level.
Well, we're back. Welcome to Rapping with Dr. Jacalyn. We are live on Business Talk Radio, Facebook Live, and YouTube Live. And we've changed places, well, through the breaks. So we're welcome back. My co-host is Diann Floyd Boehm, and she is an international children's book author. She is a speaker. She is the founder of the Story Garden. And our guest today is Reverend Mike Harder, and he is the president of Concentric. So it's good to see you both back. We were having a really good conversation before the break. I wanted to turn to the topic of sin, something that is near and dear to everyone because we are human, as you mentioned, Mike. And this show obviously is about hope and inspiration and overcoming adversity. And I'd like for the three of us just to have a conversation about, is there a relationship between sin and overcoming adversity? Is adversity tied to sin in some way? What are your thoughts, Mike?
Well, you're like taking the bull by the horns, like one of the most difficult topics. It's interesting too, because a lot of our culture today would not even, like we would, the word sin is a foreign term. It's not a term unless you are a part of a church or have grown up in the church. It's a foreign word, and it's not a word that's very popular. So I would say that up front, but I think some of it is because we don't understand what it means or what it's about. We understand it better than we know, but we don't acknowledge it. So
interesting. Diann, what are your thoughts?
I never thought of it like that, but that's a very good point because I grew up in the church and I just automatically think every human understands sin, but that might explain some of the problems of the world today. But my thing is, maybe for you, is to explain to people, sometimes we have to go through some suffering, some difficult times, maybe like my my father-in-law lost his sister when she was only 4 years old. And you sit there and go, why, right? But out of that can also become something very good. And so I think it's important, maybe you could explain why we learn as human beings that we have to walk this difficult walk in order to grow.
Sure. And it's a related topic, but maybe a little bit different, that the problem of suffering there too. So good things can happen out of suffering. That doesn't mean that it's good the suffering happens, but there is another place in the scripture where it says all things work together for the good of those who are called. I didn't quote that exactly right. All things work together for the good of those who are called according to his names and purposes. So, God does work things together for our good, but it doesn't mean that all the things that happen in our life are good. Suffering, though, it's amazing. And I hate it, but the way I grow the best, or the times I grow the best, are when I'm suffering. So that's a big topic too. The topic of sin, it does relate, because sometimes we suffer because we make poor choices because of sin, but other times it's just because of the brokenness of the world, or it's because of somebody else's sin. So you could get somebody could hold you at gunpoint and steal your money. That's not your fault that it happened, but it is the fault of the perpetrator, the person that, it's his sin, it's his violation. In sin, like from a biblical standpoint, the word sin it's an old marksman term. It's an old archery term, which both of you have probably heard that before. But it's a term that means to miss the mark. So you shouted out sin, and it means that you didn't hit the bullseye. You're missing the mark. Now, if you grew up in the church, like we said, then you understand sin to be where we violate God's standards. The standards that he gives us as a people, as human beings, as his creatures, as created creatures. So when we miss the mark, we violate the commands. Now, to somebody that is not from the church, and a lot of our listeners, I would assume, are from that, or they're from a different faith or no faith. Maybe they're skeptical. It can seem restrictive or seem weighty to kind of, we're pushing down on people, we're pressing people, talking about what you can do and what you can't do. But the reality is, if we don't have a sense of right and wrong, and we don't determine what's right or wrong, then I could be that mugger. I can be that person that steals your purse, and I could say, well, I determine, for me it's right. I need money, so for me it's right. And my doing that, and me thinking that I set my own standards, I violated what you think is a good standard. So that's one of the things you need to think about when a person thinks about, if you wonder, why are there truly rights and wrongs in life? The other thing I think is important to think about when you're talking about sin or right and wrong, and there being right and wrong, is that God set up these standards not because he's a prohibitive, restrictive God. From the one sense, we could talk about his holiness, okay, and sin having to do with his holiness and our unholiness. But another thing I think it's important to think about with sin, or another way to think about it, is this. And I think I might have said this when we were in another conversation, Jacalyn. But when my wife and I were young and we had our first child, we lived on a busy street where college students would go racing by our house, and we wanted our son, to be able to play in the yard. So we put a fence around the backyard. Now, you could say that we were being mean parents because we restricted our kids. We restricted our son's freedom. He could no longer run and go wherever he wanted to, right? So so somebody could argue and say, hey, you're being restricted. You're being a restrictive parent, putting those boundaries around your son. But the reason we did it wasn't because we were trying to be restrictive. We were trying to protect him. We were trying to protect him from harm. We didn't want him to get hit by a car. We wanted to protect him. We also wanted to give him a safe place to enjoy life. And the laws of the scriptures and the laws of what's right, what's wrong, okay, and this whole topic of sin, a lot of it really has to do with God's trying to set up a universe, trying to set up a place for us to have the full life that he desires for us. It's not to restrict life. It's the fences that are there so that we don't get hurt. So it is wrong for somebody to mug somebody else or to steal from somebody else. It is wrong to envy and or to gossip about somebody and spread false accusations about them. Greed is wrong. When I take everything in for myself and I don't have compassion on other people around me that have need, that's what sin is. And it all has to do with God's trying to set up a universe where we can experience the fullness of life together. So we sin against God, but we also sin against each other when we violate God's laws, God's principles. So that's another way to think about it.
A lot of good points there. You mentioned that some of our audience may not be believers. They may not know God. And you have had the opportunity to speak to people who haven't found the Lord. And what do you normally say to them?
That's a wide open question there. What do I say to them? Well, again, and it goes back to what we were talking about a little earlier. I want people to know that I care and that God cares, genuinely. So I don't want to preach at them. I'm not going to talk to somebody about what they're doing wrong or something like that. What I want to focus on, like let's if you're my friend that, let's say, is a skeptic or doesn't believe, I want to have a relationship with you and a rapport, and I want you. I'm hoping that you will see something different in my life that intrigues you, and if nothing else, that you would see that I care about you as a person. I want to be your friend. You're not a project. I'm not trying to change you. I want to know you, and I want you to know me. And so the first thing in it, I think, is just it's the human connection with each other. Okay, that we care about each other, and I, whether you're a Christian or not, I care about you. You're my neighbor. Whether you're a Christian or not, I want to be your friend. And if you have a need, I want to try to help you with that need. So I start with that. And that's just being a good neighbor, being a good person. And that's how Jesus was. Jesus helped his neighbor, and he told us to help our neighbors. Then what do I say to them? One time I had a conversation with a young guy that was skeptical about faith, and I just told him just to read the Gospels. Have you ever read them? I find that a lot of people that are skeptical of faith are skeptical of the Christian faith, are skeptical because of hypocrisy, in the church, because we all watch the news and we see terrible things that have happened in some churches. They've happened everywhere. They've happened in the schools too, and they've happened in the communities and homes. Okay, but the sacredness of a house of worship, of the people of God, and something, the trust being violated there, it leads to wounds that are very hard to overcome. And so a lot of the time people struggle with faith because of bad things that have happened, either in a church, or it's happened in their home, or it's happened in the name of God. And those things are wrong. It's not God's plan, but it's not God's fault that those things happen. It's a person's fault. It's man's fault. And so, a lot of the time I find that we need to address those things, but the first thing in addressing them is not to make excuses. It's to acknowledge the wrong. There's a lot of terrible things that have happened in the name of God, okay, through the centuries that are dreadfully wrong. They grieve God, and they should grieve us. So some of that is just empathy, it's understanding, it's humility too. Another thing I would say is not say, but listen. I want to share my story, but I want to hear your story. So that's a couple of the things that I usually start out with people.
Well, I'm hoping anyone out there who's watching or listening that they will reach out to you, because I think you just shared it. You're open, you're there, you want to know someone, you want to help someone, you want to listen. And I think that's what we need a lot more of in this world. Diann, what are your thoughts?
Oh, I agree wholeheartedly. And it just shows you, by reaching out to someone like you can help them. If they're feeling really bad, you help give hope, and hope is so important. And I think right now in this day and time, we all need extra hope that the world will heal and be better. Yeah,
absolutely. Absolutely. We need to be there for each other and help each other.
Exactly. But going back to the sin, if you don't mind,
Sure.
Jackie, depending on where you are in the world, you look at sin very differently.
Sure.
And if you always look at it like it's repressing you, you almost can't grow. Because if we accept that we all sin, but we want to grow from that mistake, and that's important, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And that's where there are things that we need to do to. So if you acknowledge sin, so like you acknowledge that you have a problem with anger or with lust, or you have an addiction, you need to seek help. Retraining the mind. It goes back to that marathon. You don't change by trying. You change by training. So surrounding yourself with the right people, with the right things, reading the scriptures, putting positive things, biblical things in your mind, getting accountability and encouragement, being a part of a community of faith, where other people will speak into your life and you can speak into their life. So you don't have to. As humans, we're designed to have fellowship, to be with other people, to live in community, not to live as islands. And so one of the reasons why we struggle typically is because of isolation. And sin is a very isolating thing. You get with other people that want to follow the scriptures, to follow Jesus, and it helps with sin, because now you've got somebody else walking with you and encouraging you and helping you and getting you away from the things that are taking life out of you, and the ability then to put life into you.
And I think that you also have to acknowledge that you have sinned and ask for forgiveness. And then, to the point you just made, surround yourself with people who are of a positive attitude, of a positive mindset, who do believe, who do have faith, and forgive yourself. The law of forgiveness is so important. And then you have to change your ineffective pattern of behavior to one that is effective. So, Mike, I'm wondering, what's next for Concentric?
What's next for Concentric? Well, we're in the midst of planning. We have a lot of different online meetings. So a lot of the training that I would be doing and coaching that I'd be doing live, we're doing over Zoom and on FaceTime and Skype and other platforms. So we have a lot of that coming up, and we're working on a conference gathering of our leaders that will happen in Turkey in 2023. Also preparing for a couple of Israel tours that we have, study tours where we chronologically study the life of Jesus and walk from event to event through the Gospels. So we've got a few of those events happening, those tours happening, one in the spring, hopefully, depending on how things open back up. So a lot going on, innovation online, but also a lot of live training and live gatherings that will happen in after COVID passes by. So we've had a lot of fun things happen with innovation. We've got two young guys that we're trying to meet with their leaders in Costa Rica, in a city in Costa Rica. And they started doing a podcast of that and just encouraging their leaders to jump on there. What happened is, because a podcast is open most of the time, a lot of leaders in other countries around Costa Rica, and then outside of Costa Rica, all over Latin America, started tuning in. So now they've got tons more leaders tuning in, ministry leaders that are tuning in and getting training now than what they expected. So that innovation has actually expanded the work. So we're talking about, how can we help each other? A lot of collaboration, brainstorming, sharing those stories and those ideas to help each other improve.
That's fantastic. Best wishes with all of that. Mike, we're showing your information, but for people who are listening on Business Talk Radio, what's the best way for them to reach out to you?
Well, you can go right to our website, concentricglobal.org, and you can just look for the leadership. You'll find me there. My email's there. My email is mike@concentricglobal.org, so you can email me direct as well.
That's fantastic. I want to thank you, Mike, for being a guest on the show, and for being a friend, and for doing all the wonderful things that you're doing to make this world a better place.
Great.
So
I
look forward to catching up with you again. So have a wonderful weekend, Mike.
Thanks. It's good to meet you, Diann.
Same here.
Diann, how can people reach you?
The easiest way is just to go to diannfloydboehm.com, and I'm just right there.
You do have a very comprehensive website, which is beautiful. How about just sharing with our audience the name of your books?
So I have the Little Girl in the Moon series, and I tell you what, I'll let you have the first newness awareness, but it will now become the Moonling Adventures. And so we'll be releasing a book real soon about that. And it's all about how everyone on Earth loves the moon, and the moonlings, which live on the moon, love the Earth just as much. And so that's exciting. So lots of adventures coming. And then I have Harry the Camel, and that's all about learning to love yourself just the way you are.
Well, you're doing great work, Diann. I'm so grateful that you and I connected, and it's interesting how we connected through someone else who's going to be in our show next month. But I'm thrilled to have you as a co-host today. Thank you for being here, and I hope you have a lovely time there in Maryland.
Great. Thanks for having me.
And to those of you out there on Facebook and YouTube Live, thank you so much for watching our program. If you would subscribe to Dr. Jacalyn LLC and like Dr. Jacalyn LLC on Facebook, I'd greatly appreciate it. Just an announcement that I'm pretty excited to be working with BCAT. We had brand and cultural alignment partners, Alcini, who is my co-host on our business talk show, and Mark Iorio, whom we interviewed. I am teaming up with them to help do business team coaching. So if you're out there and you have teams within your organization, you're forming teams and you need some coaching to get everybody rowing the boat the same way, please reach out to me. And that's a wrap for today on Rapping with Dr. Jacalyn. Thank you again to my co-host, Diann Floyd Boehm, and to our guest, Reverend Mike Harder. We will see you again next week.